On today's show, we'll have one of the most successful players in fantasy experts leagues ever. He'll talk about his process, how he accounts for risk, mono leagues, and yeah, he's got a new book out. Winning Fantasy Baseball's Larry Schechter joins us on the Beat the Shift podcast next. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, it's Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Team is up to 6-0 on Sunday mornings. Oh my God, we're excited. We're going for the division this Sunday. And
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. My team is 2-0, so I guess, if we were in the same league, I'd say we'd be in a collision course, but I don't think so.
There we go. Our kids' games were rained out, or field conditions, or whatever you want to call it, was bad. So we'll have to wait to have my son play Ruvain's son. But for now, let's get back to fantasy baseball. We've got a fantastic guest here. He's won several. And when I mean several, I mean a bunch of expert league titles, fantastic fantasy baseball player, author of Winning Fantasy Baseball, and now another book, The History of Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the show, Larry Schechter. How are you, Larry?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, it is our honor and privilege to have you for sure. And I do want to just talk to you a little bit about your new book, which I had the chance to read much of. Really great stuff. It's a fantastic, it's not a chronological book. It's you're sort of talking about each aspect of fantasy baseball, the history of it, but you're giving its own chapter, its own blurb about everything. Just from the publications, the historical events, the people, the shows. Maybe you can tell the audience about what's in your new book.
Yeah, well, the title is The History of Fantasy Sports, and the subtitle is The Stories of the People Who Made It Happen. What I wanted to do was kind of tell the entire story of how did we get from some ideas people had for games years ago to where we are now, where you've got millions and millions of people playing all different kinds of fantasy games all over the world, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and you've got fantasy experts, you've got radio shows, Sirius XM dedicated channel, you got news services, you got high stakes games, you got the major companies like ESPN and Yahoo are in it. You just got this entire massive industry. So yeah, I wanted to kind of tell the whole story, and I didn't know the story. I mean, I think, very few, really nobody knows most of this stuff. So I wanted to learn for myself and then be able to, share all this in a book. And as you just mentioned, I didn't really do it chronologically. I did it by sections because when I started researching and writing, I wasn't exactly sure how to present it. But at first I thought, well, maybe I'll do it kind of chronologically, go by the years. But I realized that would have been massively confusing. So it's much easier to do it by sections. So I have a chapter on the origins of fantasy baseball, a chapter on the origins of fantasy football, the first commercial games, legal issues, first publications, commissioner services, news services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I'm also interested in the origins of Larry Schechter, the fantasy baseball player. When did you start playing fantasy, and how did you get into playing in the expert leagues?
I started, I think it was about 1990 roughly. The way I got into it was a little bit unusual compared to most people. I actually was driving around Boston where I lived at the time, and I heard an ad on the radio for something called World of Sports. And it was a fantasy baseball game, and it interested me from immediately when I heard about it, and I joined this league that this guy was running it, and our draft was on a conference call. And after playing that for a couple of years, he went out of business, and I found CDM Sports Challenge in the Sporting News, and I joined that. And I played CDM for many years. I won the overall championship in 2002, and then I won the overall championship again in 2005. And for the 2005 champion, at that point, they had a deal with the Labor League where if you won the CDM Diamond Challenge, the overall winner got to be in next year's Labor. So that's how I got into Labor for the first time.
Wow. I kind of like that, where, the best of the best play and get to try out versus the experts. And lo and behold, they were right, because you've won Labor several times, if I recall.
Yeah, I think I've won it 3 times, and I've won Tout Wars 6 times.
Wow.
Absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely incredible. Question for you: what is the biggest difference, would you say, between playing fantasy baseball now versus, like, let's say 20 years ago?
Well, I mean, you've got um, all kinds of information available. Obviously, you get instant results. When I first started playing, which was, I guess, closer to 30 years ago, CDM and, well, the company I was with before CDM, they would mail you reports in the mail. So you'd have to wait a few days after the week ended to get your standings in the mail. So you had no idea where you were in the standings until like 3 days after the week ended. And now, of course, you've got live stats instantly. And prior to my time, one of the things that I talk about in the book is in the very beginning, which is 10 years or more before I started playing, everybody had to do stats by hand because there were no computers, there were no stat services. So what you had was getting stats out of the box scores, or out of the Sporting News would publish the box scores every week. And then when USA Today started publishing box scores, they would publish like the weekly statistics for all the players. So the commissioners in the early days had to take a USA Today. Tuesday had the AL stats, Wednesday had the NL stats, and the USA Today initially was not publishing weekly stats, just year to date. So the commissioners would have to take the USA Today and the prior week's USA Today, and for every player deduct one set of stats from the other set to get the weekly stats, and then enter in all the stats for the week. So it was like incredibly time consuming for the commissioners back then. And then after a couple of years of that, the USA Today started also publishing the weekly stats in addition to the year-to-date stats. So it made it a little bit easier for the commissioners.
Well, I don't want to give away the rest of the book, but definitely, if you enjoy fantasy baseball and if you want to learn more about the history, it is available on Amazon. I got my copy already. You can get yours. Just take a look at it. The History of Fantasy Sports by Larry Schechter. Fantastic stuff. So we are going to do a little bit of a strategy section. I know we're in the middle of the season, but it's not every day that we have Larry Schechter on the show, so we do have to talk about some of the draft and process with you. I'm going to just throw it out really generally. What is your overall philosophy of drafting?
My overall philosophy is to get value. If I think a player's $10, worth $10, I want to try to get him for less than $10. If I think a player's worth $20, I want to try to get him for less than $20. That's really, really simple stuff. If you have $260 to spend in an auction, you want to try to get more than $260 worth of value. If everybody just gets $260, you've gained nothing.
Yeah, so we on the show here, and Reuven can vouch for that. We have the same basic philosophy as well. The only difference I would say not the only difference. One of the differences I would say is, from what I recall, maybe you can correct us, you're pretty strict with that. If a player is $17, you're not going to go to $18 for almost any reason. Maybe one guy at the top. I can think that. Am I right? Is that your philosophy, or have you changed that a little bit?
Well, it's basically my philosophy. The problem is, though, when you're trying to spend the money in an auction, one of the biggest tricks in an auction is to not leave money on the table. And what happens in most auctions, I'm basically in Labor and Tout Wars, so that's what my experience is. the top players tend to go for more than they're worth. At least, in my opinion, they're going for more than they're worth. So when you have a lot of top players going for more than they're worth, if I don't spend something on somebody, I'm going to end up having too much money left over. So for a couple of top guys, I will tend to be willing to go over a dollar or two just so that I'm getting somebody and I'm not ending up with all this money left and there's nobody to spend it on. So that's where I make an exception. But I'm not going to go, for a $30 player, I'm not going to spend $35 like some people will. I'll go a dollar or two over if I have to. And then later on in an auction, I'm kind of trying to pay attention to the money I have left in relation to what's out there. And if I realize I'm getting myself into a bad spot where again I might have money left over, I'll go over. I'll go over by a dollar or two, or whatever I have to do for somebody just to make sure I'm getting some value and I'm not in a position where I'm going to be at the end and I have $15 left and there's like a couple of $1 players I can get.
Ruvain, we do a little bit different than that. How would you characterize your concept of the value drafting?
I think it's really league context. The league is, how the room is going, how you want to pick the players, and if you feel the draft is hot, you want to, throw out certain players that you're not really interested in, but maybe get some money off the board. But we are willing to spend a little bit more for inflation. If let's say steals are going more, maybe we may have to pay a little more of a premium for steals, or maybe more of a premium for power or strikeouts, whatever it may be. And we also want to try later on in the draft to try to have, there's a certain threshold when we can't buy people at value where it's not worth it. The top guys are usually worth it, but if you're going to buy the middle guys, like say the guys worth anywhere between $8 and $15, if you buy them at value, you are not going to make money in the end. You're not going to come out with more than 260. You're probably going to come out closer to 260, which is not what you want. So you really want to try to aim to try to get those bargains toward the middle and the bottom, because you're not, just like Larry, just like you said, you're not going to get those bargains at top. You're probably going to get the bargains in the bottom. And if you start paying at value toward the middle and toward the bottom, you're not going to get those values.
So the thing I'll add is I'm big on the concept of a relative bargain. If the top elite starting pitchers are all going +4 over value, I'm okay with going +2 because +2 is a $2 relative bargain to everyone going +4. If catchers are going $4 over, I'm okay +2. If catchers are going all $1 under, I don't want to go $1 under. I want to go $3 under. Whatever the market is paying over or under my values, I want to have a relative discount to that. One thing I wanted to ask you, Larry, because I've noticed this year in your drafts and in the past couple of years, you spend high on catchers. I'm wondering, is that because you just value catchers with full replacement value, that they're just worth a lot and you don't believe the market is pricing well? Or is there any other reason? I'm just curious, why are you buying high-value catchers in general?
Well, there are probably two reasons. One is that when you have a value formula, you have to have an adjustment for catchers because of scarcity. There's definitely scarcity for catchers, and you need to allow for that in a value formula. There's almost never scarcity for any other position. The idea that like a middle infielder has scarcity, it's not true. So allowing for the scarcity for catchers, that's going to drive the value up, to begin with. And then secondly, back to the idea of getting high value players for a decent price. Like you just said, if everybody's going $5 over for the really top players and you only go $2 over, that's a good deal. So I agree with that, and that's kind of what I'll try to do.
Okay.
And with the high value catchers, oftentimes I can get a high value catcher for a decent price, like maybe spend $20 for a $20 catcher, or get them for 18 or 19 for a $20 catcher. So that's a good deal if I can get a dollar or two off. One other thing that I look at is, you got to kind of look at the categories, and one thing I'm always tending to look at is where can I get some guys with a decent batting average. And catcher is usually a place where I can do that, because when I go to a
decent batting average at catcher.
Well, here's what compared to the other catchers. See, what I was about to say is when I go to an auction or a draft, I I look at the player pool, for the people that I think should be included in the draft, and I'll look at what is the batting average of all the catchers, and what is the batting average of all the non-catchers, and what I'll come up with is I'm just making up a number off the top of my head. This isn't like a real number, but it may be that the 24 catchers that I think should be drafted amongst the 12 teams, maybe their total average is say 230. So if I can get a catcher that's going to get 265, which isn't a great batting average compared to everybody else, but compared to the catchers, he's like 35 points better than the average catcher. That's where I'm going to make up some ground in the batting average category.
Okay, so it's interesting that you're saying that. You're saying that you're using it a lot to come up with like a batting average difference. That I'm gonna go for the. I know it's a lot of money, but it's worth it to go for the batting average, guys. It's an interesting concept. When you're doing the replacement level values and you're bumping up catchers, are you literally looking at the bottom number 30 catcher in a 2-catcher 15-team league and saying, "Yep, that guy's got to be $1"?
Well, basically, yeah. In a 15-team league, the worst catcher would be $1. Yes.
All right, so
That's where an adjustment comes in. If you, I mean, people have different value formulas, but my value formula, most value formulas, the 30th catcher is going to be worth like maybe negative $4, but he's got to be in the player pool. So that's where you have to make an adjustment. If the worst catcher is negative $4, you got to bump all the catchers up $5 so that guy is worth $1.
yeah, I mean usually the bottom catchers are even worse than that. They're negative 5, 6.
Well, this year is different. This year, a lot of the catchers had more value, so you know
Yes.
it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different. It's different every year. I mean, I'm just throwing out a number. -4, -5
Yeah,
would
yeah.
probably be kind of typical. But every year it's going to be different. Also, it's going to be different if you're, if you're in a 15-team draft, it's going to be, a little bit different adjustment than if you're in like a 12-team auction or what have you.
Yeah, it's the actual number is going to be different depending on your player pool. The only thing I will say is that for catchers, I don't do the full adjustment and bump up, and I will actually end up with the bottom catchers being like worth a -1 or -2. So let's say there's like let's say a $7 bump for everybody. I'm only bumping up $5. The reason that I do that, and it comes about when you're doing the bump up, you're taking some projections and you're looking at what the projected values are at the very bottom. But if you actually studied what the year-end replacement levels are, every single year it's not as deep, it's not as low, I should say, as the preseason projections. Preseason projections show a much bigger bump than the actual, final year-end values. So I actually use the final year-end values as my bump up, not the preseason projections. I don't value catchers as highly as that. And also the market doesn't. Again, if I'm doing relative bargains, the market is actually not doing the full replacement value. The market is doing a little bit closer to what I'm doing, and that's why I want to stay with the market and see where the relative bargains are with that. A little bit of a nuanced difference. For me, though, personally, I'm finding myself buying higher valued catchers, but for a different reason. I'm tending to find a lot of good bargains in the hitting and not as great bargains in the pitching. So because I'm spending a little bit less on the hitting and more in the pitching, and I want to put a little bit more money into offense, a great place to do that is at catcher. Those catchers are priced pretty fairly up and down in terms of what my expectation is versus the market. So I'm just paying roughly market value, maybe $1 or $2 less or whatever. I can get a small relative bargain, but I'm putting the money in it because I'm not spending a lot on offense. I'm getting bargains, but I want a total offense spend a little bit more, so I'm just pushing a little bit more money via catching, and it's worked for me. This year in Talent and Labor, I have literally the best offense in both leagues. I wish my teams were my Tout Wars team is good. My Labor team is not great, but it's not because of the hitting. It's because of the pitching. Despite the fact that I've actually spent quite a bit more on pitching. I've been bombarded by injuries. I'm gonna blame it on the injuries, Ruvain.
Yeah, I would too. But in one of the leagues that we're in the GDD league, it's a 15-team league with a 2-catcher league. there was a real anomaly this year where one of the players was actually on auto pick, auto draft, auto auction,
Oh
and
yeah.
I actually used the whole catchers and the values of catchers to my advantage. I saw that there were going to be no values anywhere because the computer kept bidding up to certain prices, so the values weren't by a lot of the hitters. But then I saw, wait a second, they're not bidding up the catchers to where with replacement level where the levels of the catchers are actually worth, which is why I ended up with two top catchers and I got my value there because I knew I wasn't going to get value elsewhere. I mean, that again, that's an anomaly and that's not normal, but you could still use that. You can still use the idea of using the catchers in certain ways to help your overall value.
Yeah, very interesting. One thing I also noticed, Larry, and you play a little bit more mono leagues than mixed leagues, but I always see that you get an elite closer and you're willing to pay. I think you have like a $23 manual classe in some of your leagues, which is a high spend for a closer. My question is that something that you're conscious of because it's a mono league, you have to. And how do you value closers? Because I have to say, when I look at the value of closers when I do my formulas, the closers come out much less, but because the market is paying, I say, well, everybody's paying $5 over. You got to pay $5 over. Just get the best relative bargain. Are you doing something different in your formulas, or are you just saying, like me, you got to pay the market value and get your guy?
I think it's because we're using different formulas.
Okay, I'm
Because
interested to hear.
for me, I'm getting a manual Class A. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I paid 23, it's because I thought he was worth 24 and a half or something like that. But one of the big things that you gotta be aware of in value formulas is how you split the money. You got $260 budget. Some people with their value formulas are going to put 67% of the money into hitting and 33% into pitching. Some are going to do 65-35. Some might even do something different. And that makes a huge difference because let's say, for example, I'm putting 67% of the money into hitting. I'll have a hitter who I think is worth $30. But if I was only using 65%, that hitter, instead of being worth $30, is going to be worth something like $28 roughly. So that makes a huge difference, and you kind of have to just be aware that people are doing value formulas differently. Some people are doing value formulas where they're they're going to value stolen bases more than other people, or vice versa. And you have to kind of go with the flow and pay attention in an auction um, to this sort of thing, because otherwise, you might end up having like massive overkill in stolen bases, for example, because in your value formula, you're valuing stolen bases more than other people are valuing them. So every time you think you're getting a good bargain, every time you think you're getting a $20 player for $17 and you keep buying them, it might be because you're valuing stolen bases more than everybody else. And it could be that there's something wrong with your value formula and you're valuing stolen bases too high. Or on the other hand, you could be right. You could have the best value formula in the world and everybody else is wrong. But that's not going to do you any good, because you're going to end up with a team that's going to get 300 stolen bases, and that's not going to do you any good. Then you're going to try to trade stolen bases if you're even in a league that you can make trades, and you're not going to get a lot of value for what you're trying to trade, because people again think that they're worth less than you do.
I've also noticed that you don't really buy anyone over $30. I'm just wondering if that's really the result of you being a quote-unquote value drafter, that the market tends to pay over at the top. So that's, Larry Schechter doesn't want any part of that, so you're just not getting it. You're scooping up the middle. Is that, am I right? Is that how you come to that, it comes natural to you?
Well, yeah, I don't go into an auction thinking I'm not going to get anybody for more than $30, but it usually works out that way for the reasons I said before, where like the guys that maybe are worth $35 or $40, everybody's going like $5 over for them, and I'm not going to do that. I'm might be willing to go a dollar or two over, and once in a while I'll get somebody for a dollar or two over, but if everybody else is going $3 over, $5 over, I'm going to drop out.
And are you planning on, by position, Are you planning and saying, I think here's three guys that I might get a bargain on because I'm looking at what the market is doing, and then I see what I'm doing, and yep, I'll probably get one of these first basemen, or you know what, I'll probably get a $20 third baseman and a $10 shortstop. Are you looking at it by position or by statistic just to see where you have possibilities?
Well, what I do, all this I wrote about in my first book, Winning Fantasy Baseball, which was 10 years ago, but it's all still relevant. Um, Once I've gone through with player projections and making the player pool and my values, um, I'll look at values and other sources. Like what I wrote about in the first book is I have this column on my spreadsheet called Others Values, and I would take some values from places like Baseball HQ, RotoWire, RotoWorld. I would write in their values for like an AL only auction, and I would kind of compare my values with three or four or five other sources, and I would see where it looks like I might get a bargain, because like I think a guy's worth $15 and everybody else is saying he's worth $10 or whatever. Now what I've done since 10 years ago when I wrote that, what I do now is I'm paying even more attention to like the ADP. So like before, like say the Tout Wars auction, I'm going into the AL only Tout Wars auction. I'll look at the ADP from like the NFBC 15 team or 12 team draft, whatever they have. And so even though it's a completely different style of play, let's say I got, you know, I got like a bunch of guys that I think are worth $25, give or take, in an AL only auction, and I look at the NFBC ADP and I see there's like one or two guys in this group where their ADP is a lot lower than everybody else. Then I think that's going to translate to a potential bargain for me in the draft, in the auction rather.
Yep.
So yeah, so based on that, I'll do that by position. So I'll go into an auction with an idea by position of what players I might get at a value.
Do you ever go into an auction thinking, I don't want this guy, or I can't have this guy, or I need this guy, I have to have this guy?
I mean, I'll go in knowing that there's guys that everybody else thinks is worth more than I do, so I'm not likely to get them.
Where are you on the risk frontier? So, when I do valuation, I'm taking my projections, but I'm adjusting it for some risk, right? The prices are what I call risk adjusted. If a player is often injured, then he's going to get a ding, right? And I have some mathematical ways to do it, of course. If a player is pretty stable, he might even get a positive because it's all going to balance out. There might be some players where I'm basically saying stay away from, whereas risk adjustment is -7. Take $7 off. Do you have any risk adjustment to values once you do your projections? Are they
Well,
baked in? Are they baked into your projections?
Yeah, for me, they're baked into the projections. If you got a guy like Troy Tulowitzki, back a few years ago, or Byron Buxton, these guys that keep getting injured, I'm not going to put them down for 500 at bats. So it's really, it's kind of partly a guessing game, but I'll try to be on the conservative side. If I'm trying to estimate how many at bats I think Byron Buxton is likely to get, it's not going to be 500 or 550. So it's baked in. It's in the projections where I'm going to do the risk adjustment, and based on how many at bats I'm going to project a guy like Byron Buxton for. And there's usually somebody or a couple people in an auction or a draft that they're going to think, boy, Byron Buxton, this year he just might stay healthy and get 500 at bats, and I'm going to have a great bargain. So I'm usually not going to end up buying a guy like Byron Buxton or Troy Tulowitzki back when he was playing.
So you don't account for I don't want to, I don't want to buy three guys who are oft injured that I've cut their playing time. Do you not think about that? You just say, hey, this guy is a bargain.
The three guys that would be taken care of in their projections and their what their value is based on my projected at bats for them.
Right.
But yeah, what you're saying, that I would be aware of that. Like let's say there's an injury guy that I actually got him at a decent price, so I bought him, and then there's maybe one or two more come up. Yeah, I would be consciously aware of that.
Okay.
Like, wait, I already got Byron Buxton.
Got it.
Maybe I don't want three other guys that are going to get hurt. And then, like in the NFBC this year, well, I shouldn't say this year. Like in the NFBC, you don't have an injury list, so you have to be more conscious of that. And yeah.
Right. It makes sense. So, I mean, like, when I'm putting risk adjustments, it's off of projections, which, is somewhat formulaic, but you're doing your own projections. Maybe you can explain how you do that. And I'm assuming maybe because you're handling the playing time yourself, you're doing the whole risk adjustments right away by saying, yeah, Byron Buxton, let's give him 100 at-bats, and that's it,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the risk adjustment is in the at-bats for players that are, injury prone. There's also, like playing time risk. Guys like Austin Hayes this year, he was somebody I had a little bit of a hard time trying to figure out how much of a risk he was going to be for possibly losing playing time. And it looks like it on him because he's lost a lot of playing time already. Between not doing well and having, they got a lot of good options like Colton Cowser breaking out and stuff like that. But there's other risks as far as like, well, how much playing time do you think a guy's going to get? Or, you got a guy who is maybe going to be the closer for a team, but not for sure. And you just got to, I think I just have to do the best I can trying to figure out like what's the over under. If you got a guy like James MacArthur at the beginning of the year that is maybe starting out number 2 for saves behind Will Smith, but maybe he's really more of a 1B, or he's got a 30% chance of overtaking Will Smith to be the closer, whatever. It's just kind of like you got to figure out the over under of all possibilities. Like if the 2024 season, we're going to be played 100 times or 1,000 times, what's the over under for how many saves Will Smith is going to get, or how many saves James MacArthur is going to get? And it's some of it's more of an art than a science.
Sure. Do you ever look at projections, or do you say, I don't want to be influenced by them, I'm going to do my own? Like that how does that come about? Because for me, I'm looking at projections, I'm doing my own, but my own is somewhat formulaic, right? And my thoughts on players and whether I think players are bargain are really baked on that, right? I form some of my opinion based on the projections. What do you do? Do you not look at projections, have your own opinion, make your own set of values, and that's it? Or has projections come into your world?
Well, what I do, I'll tell you what I used to do, and then what I did this year, because it was a little bit slightly different. What I would do is I would do my own projections, and then after that, I would take like a second look at people, and that's when I would look at other projections. I would go to like 3 sources that I like their projections, and I would take an average of the 3 sources, and I would compare it to my projections, and I would see if there's anything that I wanted to take another look at again. Like for the most part, they're pretty similar. Mostly, what I would project is going to be pretty similar, with the possible exception of the at bats. For people that their playing time might be a little uncertain, or there might be an injury risk. This year, I kind of did it all at once, because this year I spent 18 months researching and interviewing people for the book that I just wrote. It was a massive, ridiculous undertaking. I had no idea what I was getting into, and I needed to get it wrapped up, so it really cut into my baseball prep this year. So I kind of streamlined everything and did it all at once.
Is your favorite projections ATC?
I'm not allowed to comment on that.
No comment.
The judge has said that Donald Trump can't speak about his trial, and the judge has also said I can't speak about ATC.
Well, this judge is a big fantasy baseball player, then.
Yeah, he's the judge, but the judge is biased. He's a fan of Baseball HQ. I'm sorry.
There you go.
I'll ask Ruvain first, but have you changed your process of valuing anything significantly in the last, I don't know, 8 years?
Not so much in just the fact of how much you're putting for pitching and hitting each year. It always changes. Like about 10 years ago when we first started doing, or 11 years ago, 12 years ago when we first started doing the NFBC, pitching wasn't going that people weren't spending that much money in pitching. Then all of a sudden slowly the pitching started getting more and more expensive, and then we had to spend more money, otherwise you'd be quote unquote locked out of the top pitchers. So I think that's the main thing that's really changed over really the past 10 years. Otherwise, you're having more people play with more people with more knowledge out there. I don't think there's such a thing as a sleeper anymore. And if you think it's a sleeper, then already 10 people or 20 people know about it already. So there's really nothing to change. You just have to make sure to stay the course and understand what you're getting into. The people who are in your league. Is it an expensive money league? Are people just throwing their money away? Are you the dead money there? There are a lot of different aspects that really philosophy hasn't changed too much, but it's tweaking it. Every year you have to tweak it just a little bit, and those little tweaks over time actually turn into big ones.
Yeah, Larry, have you changed your process much in the last 8 years? And if so, like, what would be the biggest change?
Not really. The only kind of minor thing is what I mentioned before about placing more emphasis in the ADP rather than what values are published on some website or magazine. It's a much better measure of what people are going to actually go for. If somebody in the NFBC drafts, if somebody's going at ADP 100 or 200, that's more useful information than if some website or magazine says that this guy's worth $8 or $10 or whatever.
Yeah.
As far as the sleepers, yeah, there really aren't sleepers anymore. I'll tell you when there were sleepers is, in researching my book, back in the very early days, even before I played, I mean, there was just such a lack of information. Like, one of the first fantasy football leagues that started, people would, they'd try to call other cities' newspapers or teams to get information. One guy subscribed to like 28 newspapers, from all the NFL cities. And back then you could get a sleeper. If you're subscribing to 28 newspapers, you could get some information that other people aren't getting if they're not subscribing to 28 newspapers. But now, I mean, all the information is available, on the internet real easily.
Yeah, and there's so much information, so many news, and so many sources. I do want to talk a little bit about mono leagues because that is one of your fortes. Just to set it up, what do you think is the difference in drafting mono versus mixed leagues?
Well, there's a big difference, and now I haven't played in a mixed league in a long time. I'm not sure, but 10 years or give or take. But the problem with mixed leagues is there's no intelligent way to make a value formula. You can't put something in a spreadsheet and make a value formula and come out with values for a mixed league that makes sense.
No, I disagree with that.
Well,
Sorry.
It's like when you I wrote about this in my book, Winning Fantasy Baseball. I have a chapter about mixed auctions. And I wrote about this, and honestly, it's been a long time since I played in a mixed auction, and I have not stayed up with them. So, maybe there's something better now than there was, but it's kind of like I had to, what I wrote about in the book is I had to basically take like the mono league prices, and because like in a mixed auction, you could have a guy that in a mono league is worth $12 or $10, but in a mixed auction he's going to be a $1 player.
Yeah, but well, I mean, if correct me if I'm wrong, and I've read your book at least twice, I have to say. You generally use SGPs, right?
Yep.
And so, I mean, I use Z-scores. The formula with Z-scores is identical on how you do it in a mono versus mixed league, and you get the type of curve, 12 goes to 2 or whatever it is, but it's the same formula. Are you saying this because you don't have reliable SGPs for mixed leagues? Is that why? Because I just disagree with the premise that you can't value guys.
To be perfectly honest, I don't actually remember all the details.
Okay. Okay.
Because like I haven't played in a mixed auction in so long. I just remember, like one thing I remember though is like in in a mixed auction, like you got, like let's say like the 36th best middle infielder who is going to be in the player pool, he might be worth like $10 if it was a mono league, but in a mixed auction, he's going to be available at the end for $1.
Yeah.
And you'll have guy, and so like you got a guy like that. His name comes up like I'm trying to think of it. Some guy that would be worth $10 in a mono league. Somebody, let's say Ariel Cohen is a third baseman
There you
worth
go.
$10 in a mono league, and
Just
somebody
10?
in the
Just
middle
10?
in the middle of the auction, somebody says, "All right, Ariel Cohen, $1." And somebody goes like 3, and then 4, and then 6, and Ariel Cohen just got bought for $6, and somebody's thinking, hey, I got a good deal because I got Ariel Cohen for $6, and he's worth $10 in a mono league. But what they don't realize is he should have gone at the end of the draft for $1.
Um, yeah, well, that's also on, how things come up and all that.
Well, it's the replacement level of the 36th best corner infielder is just much different when you have a mixed auction than in a mono league.
Oh, sure, sure, sure. I mean, again, I use the Z-score format, and it's about the dispersion, and there's some average statistic of the player pool. There's some dispersion, and it's going to be a different curve, but I definitely have methods. But just to ask you about Fab, what is the difference in Fab? I mean, to me, that's a very big difference in mixed and mono leagues. So, first of all, with mono, you have the concept of a league crossover midseason, so you might have to account for holding money for that. And of course, there's very little available that are players playing, actively and constantly in a lineup. What do you think the biggest differences are, and how do you play the differences between mono and mixed in terms of waiver wire pickups and Fab?
Well, one big difference is what you just said, that when you get to the trade deadline, there's probably going to be some really good players getting traded back and forth that are going to be available in Fab. I think sometimes people might make the mistake of placing too much emphasis on that and thinking too much about holding money for the trade deadline. If I have needs early in the year or in the middle of the year, I'm going to spend money to help with what I need, or if there's some good player available. I'm not going to worry about how much money I have left at the trade deadline, unless if it happens to work out that I really didn't need to spend much, and I'm getting closer to the trade deadline, and I have like the most Fab or the third most Fab or something. At that point, I'll pay attention to it and say, okay, maybe I'll try to be able to get a really good player at the trade deadline. One thing you got to keep in mind also is when you get a player at the trade deadline, you got them for like 7 weeks or something like that. Whereas if you get a player, like today, you got them for 20 weeks or something like that. So that's something to definitely keep in mind when you're figuring out how much to bid on somebody.
Yep, obviously, and you
Yes.
can have an amazing player at the trade deadline versus a okay player. Of course, the cost benefit analysis. Ruvain, anything else to ask Larry on drafting? I know we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but anything on your end to ask?
Yeah, I wanted to know. Things have changed a lot. We have the internet, obviously. When you started doing it, there was newspapers and box scores, and everyone used to wake up in the morning looking at the box scores, and I loved doing that when I was a kid. But what have you seen as a difference between online auctions and in-person auctions? Because in-person auctions, obviously, you have the whole idea of being with somebody and everything like that, but now the new craze and the easiest thing to do is to do an online auction. Do you do any online auctions? Do you see a difference, and which one do you prefer?
Well, the only time I did online auctions is because of COVID. Labor and Tout Wars, got forced to do online auctions for a couple of years because of COVID. And I absolutely would prefer, in person. Is much more fun. But I'll tell you that the one big difference I noticed in the online auction is it's a little bit difficult for me to be looking at my papers and following the bidding because the bidding is on the screen. I don't know if anybody
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody does an online auction that has audio, but the ones I did, if you want to know what the bidding is, you got to look at the screen. It's a little hard to look at the screen and all my papers at the same time. Whereas if I'm, when I'm in a auction in person, I can look at my papers and I hear the bidding, and I can even say a bid without even looking up if I want to.
So you're also a paper person, not a computer person, when
Yes.
you're coming at the auction?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, we've definitely talked about that concept that there's more things going on online, and that's why, like, when we talk about teamwork and having a partner and playing with a second player, to me it's more beneficial for an online auction even than in person, because you can do more things at once. You can multitask more when you're in person.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, but overall though, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean, and it's certainly a lot easier than getting people together in person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's convenience of your own home as well. And the NFBC offers stuff like every day in the draft season, so there's definitely reasons. I mean, I prefer in person. It's so much better. And for me also, and I've covered this in the show, but I use my voice to try to induce or get somebody to get out of the bidding, and to me that's an advantage I think I have. Online, I mean, nobody's seeing or hearing me. You just see a number bid, and that's it.
That's not true. Some people see them in their head, so you never know.
Well, if I have that kind of influence, then you're lucky. All right, let's do a little bit of waiver wire for this week. I know we've talked a lot about draft, but we still have the season to cover here. I'm going to start with you, Ruvain, first. Who are a couple of waiver wire guys that you might want to pick up this week?
Okay, I'm going to go with a couple of deep players here. First of all, I'm going to go with Jake McCarthy. He's only 7% owned in CBS. He's not playing every day, but when he does, he's batting .307, 3 stolen bases, and 9 RBIs. Now, he was known last year, everyone wanted him for his stolen bases, and he's only one injury away from getting full playing time. I don't think he's going to get sent back down again like he was last year, so he's a guy, he's only 7% owned. If you need a backup outfielder, he's a great guy. Another guy, if you need a backup outfielder who came off the IL just this week, is Dylan Carlson. He's had a history of doing well. He's only 5% owned in CBS, but people tend to forget about him because he just was not around. He was injured for the whole time. So he's going to get some playing time in that Cardinal outfield. They're going to try to do something to shake things up to get back into that race. So you never know. He may get hot. He's a guy who's available. And I want to throw out a middle reliever for this week, and that's Adam Ottavino. He's pitching for the Mets. I think we've mentioned him before. He's not the saves guy, but he's got a 3.14 ERA, a .89 whip, and 25 strikeouts in 14 innings. He's vultured one save already, and he's only 8% owned in CBS. So this is the type of guy that if you don't like the number 4 or 5 starter you have out there, if you have him on your bench, you throw him out there, he should help pad your ERA and whip and maybe vulture a save or a win here and there.
All right, Larry, who's a couple of guys that you're interested in for this week?
Well, would be a special situation, but if you need a middle infielder, or actually a third baseman, Dylan Moore is playing pretty much full time until J.P. Crawford comes back. If you need, he actually plays like I think second, third, and outfield or something like that. If you need a guy for a week or two in those positions, he's actually a good value when he's playing almost every day. His batting average sucks, but he gets a lot of home runs, a lot of stolen bases for the playing time. Another one to look at if you're a similar situation would be Jorge Mateo. With Jackson Holliday sent down, Mateo's playing fairly often, and he's running. So if you need somebody for that position, somebody to take a look at.
I'll throw in a couple of names. First of all, if Daniel Hudson's available on your waiver wire for the short term, he is the replacement for Evan Phillips. So if you want to pick up a couple quick saves, Daniel Hudson would be the guy. And I'll mention 2 middle infielders that I think are under-owned. Zach Neto in L.A. He's got a pretty good power speed blend. I think he's very under-owned, probably a little bit more shallow and a little bit deeper. But Michael Massey on Kansas City, I actually had drafted him in quite a few 15-team mixed leagues, but especially in the NFBC where he was hurt to start the season, I had to drop him because who's gonna pick him up, right? So I dropped him, but I re-picked him up in a lot of leagues because he's got some pop, right? If you're a little bit short on pop, middle infield is a place where there isn't too much pop. He might be able to provide it at the bottom if you need to pick up a middle infielder. That's Michael Massey of Kansas City. All right, it is time for the pitcher preview.
Let's see who the Pirates are playing this week.
All right. Let's start with you, Larry. Who is a pitcher that you'd like to pick up this week?
I have no idea, frankly. I have not given that question any thought.
It's the section where we look at pitchers who face the Pirates.
He's trying to give you a hint here.
Let's see. I can get my computer on and see who's facing the Pirates.
Or probably someone facing the White Sox or the Marlins this year. I think those are the two teams you really should be looking for.
Yeah, okay. My computer's not acting fast enough for me to grab this question.
Okay, well, let me throw a guy out there.
I'll defer to you guys on this one.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out one guy because I don't love any of the two-star pitchers that are out there. I really prefer throwing middle relievers this week. But Andrew Heaney, he's 32% owned in CBS right now. He's one start right now, supposed to start against the Angels. He's got a 2.84 ERA in his last two starts. He's 0-2 in those starts. But the crazy thing, he's got 16 strikeouts and 0 walks. That's very interesting to me. That means he's just pitching with very bad luck, and he's pitching pretty well, and he's gone at least 5 innings in every game this year except for the first game of the season. So with all those things being said, if he's available in your league, it's only one start this week, but he may be 2 start the following week. And if you get him and he's got good 2 starts next week, then you have a guy for this week and you have a guy for next week.
Facing the Pirates.
I'll endorse that. Haney, he's worth having on your team, especially in a 15-team mixed league. He's worth having on your team, and not just for the 2 starts, but just in general. He's worth having.
And he's facing the Pirates next week, which is, that helps also.
Javier Assad facing the Pirates this week. He's under-owned. He's great. 2.63 ERA on the Cubs. Cubs are doing well. I'm sorry. No, not 2.63 ERA. I'm reading the wrong guy, but he's doing great. Javier Assad, definitely a pickup. On the Pirates, by the way, Paul Skeens called up. He may or may not be available in your league. This might be a case of Fab-a-palooza for those league rules that you absolutely they didn't allow him to be picked up beforehand. But yeah, if he's available, that guy's gonna go. What do you think, Ruben? He's gonna go for like $400 in NFBC this week?
Yes, and be totally not worth it for the rest of the year. So yes, he'll probably go for that, and he won't be worth it. Just like we mentioned last week, Christian Scott, if he's available, also he's pitching against the Braves this week, but next week he's got a more favorable matchup, and if he's still, for some reason still available in your league, he's a high upside guy, but just don't spend too much money on these guys. You spend too much money on them, they don't bring back enough return for you to get it. He's not going to go out there. Neither of these guys, I don't think, are going to go out there and win either Rookie of the Year, it's possible, or Cy Young. So, understand what you're bidding for and how much money you're spending.
You could be eating your words with Skeens. Skeens has looked absolutely fantastic in AAA. He could be a generational pitcher.
When was the last time a pitcher came up in May and won the Cy Young? That's or Rookie of the Year.
Well, he doesn't have to win that to be worth it if he's really good for 5 months.
Even if you spend like 20 to 30% of your fab on him?
Oh, 20-30% easily. I mean, even like Tanner Bybee was worth that last year. I mean, if he's gonna put up Tanner Bybee numbers, at the very least, he's worth 20 to 30% of your fab. Definitely.
Okay.
In a 15-team league for sure. I will add in Kenta Maeda, coming back. He's got some upside. If you want to take a gamble in a deep league, he's at Cleveland this week. And then Miami and at Arizona next week, so could be there. Michael Lorenzen at Oakland this week, and then he might be 2-start against Cleveland and L.A. the following week. So those are 2 interesting pitchers for deep leagues. And I did mention Alek Manoah last week. Again, this is a dart. I highly doubt that it's going to happen, but there's a probability that it will. He's kind of free right now. I don't know. If you have the room on your roster, pick up a guy for $1 on the waiver wire and just pray. And worst comes to worst, he stinks and you get rid of him. But he's got the upside of a good pitcher, so might be worth it, especially if your team is down. All right, Larry, do you have anyone, or are you just pretending not to know anyone so that anybody listening to this podcast won't beat you in Tout Wars?
Yeah, no, I haven't looked really. Now, I'll tell you, John Means came off the injury list recently, and John Means is probably not available in your league, but just take a look and be sure, because if he's available, he's a really good one to have.
I have John Means in a bunch of leagues. Yeah, it's funny how John Means and Kyle Bradish.
Right, and Bradish, yeah.
Yeah, big discount in draft season, but there were indications that they would be back sometime after a month or a month and a half. So I have quite a bit of each of them. Just taking gambles on guys who I think, might come back at some time. All right, Ruvain, injury update. What you got?
Okay, well, we'll start with a couple of big names. First of all, Trey Turner. Trey Turner's on the IL with a left hamstring strain. He said that he himself expects to miss at least 6 weeks, and a return sooner would be, quote, would be a big win, which is very interesting. And they've actually been using Bryson Stott now at short, and Manuel Sosa will get some time there as well. So if Sosa's available, he can steal. He's a good blend of power and speed. Also, if he gets playing and he gets hot, there's a guy to think about. Wilson Contreras, this was very hard to watch. I was watching the Met game when this happened. J.D. Davis swung the bat and hit him in the left forearm, breaking his wrist. He needed surgery. He's expected to be out 6 to 8 weeks. One of their young prospects, Ivan Herrera, was going to get most of the playing time there. So if you really are desperate for a catcher, he's a guy to look for. Speaking of prospects, Wyatt Langford was placed on the IL with right hamstring strain. He's expected to miss only 3 to 4 weeks. I mentioned Evan Phillips. He's got a right hamstring strain. It's grade 1, so their absence could be about 3 to 4 weeks. So you mentioned Daniel Hudson. He's a guy to go for. A couple guys rehabbing. Kodai Senga, he's rehabbing. He threw a batting practice this past weekend. He's not eligible to return until May 27th. But he is on target to return around that time. So if for some reason someone dropped him because of a roster crunch, look for that. Jason Dominguez, he's continuing his rehab. Aaron Boone, who's someone you can never believe when it comes to injuries, said that he's beginning a rehab assignment in the next 2 weeks. So I guess it'll be in 2 weeks, which means that he's on pace to return sometime right before the All-Star break. He is returning from Tommy John surgery. And the aforementioned Byron Buxton. He's on the IL with right knee inflammation. I think I mentioned him at least
I'm
7 or 8
I'm
times.
sorry, but is Byron Buxton on the IL? Really?
Yes, it's a complete surprise.
No.
But he had an MRI done, and the MRI was normal. So there's a chance he can come back at a decent time. He's already begun running in a pool and participating in normal workouts, but he hasn't yet swung a bat. There's no timetable for his return. But you can, it's possible, if everything goes well, he may return on May 12th. But the Twins may wait until after then, because they're playing in Toronto, and they probably don't want him running on the AstroTurf because he may, fall apart.
So, Ruben, we have to record a drop with you that says, and Byron Buxton's on the IL. Like, we could have recorded that drop like 5 years ago and just played it like every single injury update.
You just play it every single year. But listen, people know he's going to get hurt, so as long as that's baked into your projections, this shouldn't be coming as a shock to you.
Larry, what did you have for plate appearances for Byron Buxton this year? Over or under 7?
Over 7.
Well, you know what I mean. Was it like 100, 200, that low?
No, probably, I don't know offhand, but probably 300 or something like that. But, a level at which I'm not going to end up having him on my team because there are other people are going to be more optimistic.
Yeah. So sad. All right. Well, that's the story with today. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I want to thank Larry Schechter for coming on the show. Larry, well, why don't you tell us, what's going on with you? Maybe a little bit more information about where they can get your book and all things Larry Schechter.
All right. Well, what I want to say about the book is, it's the history of fantasy sports, but the subtitle really says it all, where it says the stories of the people who made it happen. Because when I started researching this, I realized early on that I could write it with all the facts and figures, and it would tell all the facts and figures, but it would come off like a very boring research paper. So what I did is I've told stories of all the people involved and what they did and how they did it, and there are just so many interesting stories, one after another, interesting, some are inspirational, some will bring tears to your eyes, some are funny, And so I'm really proud of what I did. I think it was just something that somebody needed to do because nobody knows this information. You know, I got a few. The book is available right now on Amazon, paperback and Kindle. It'll be available elsewhere later on. Right now, it's just Amazon. And I had some advanced quotes from people that read it that are on the book cover. You can see it if you go to Amazon or go to my Twitter, Larry Schechter. You'll see it on my Twitter, my pinned tweet. But like Paul Charchian, for example, Paul Charchian was the president of the FSTA from 2009 to 2020. He's been in the industry his entire life. And he said there's so much that he read in my book he didn't even know about. He was enlightened with all kinds of things. And I interviewed dozens and dozens of people. I interviewed everybody from Dan Okrent and Rick Wolf and Greg Ambrosius to people who have played in APA or Stratomatic leagues for 50 years. I did probably more than 100 interviews and just massive research. So it's not something that comes off as like some boring history book. I think it's very, very interesting.
No, absolutely. No, I've read maybe half of it already. I just got the book the other day, and no, really great stuff, great information. Not very autobiographical. I was like thinking, oh, maybe it'll be a little bit about Larry Schechter. It's really not.
No, it's nothing about me. It's not about me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of times I'll offer some slight opinion or commentary, but very, very little. It's not about me at all.
Who's your favorite person in the industry, by the way?
Well, Ariel Cohen, obviously.
Wow.
There you go.
Oh, really is? No.
My favorite person. Boy, let's see. My favorite person.
Try not to slide. Try not to slide anyone. That's all.
No, if she'd give me her phone number, Kay Adams would be my favorite person in the industry.
All right.
Well,
We'll end
let
on that
that
one.
go.
We'll end on that one. Ruvain, what's up with you?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. I also have a weekly article on Rotoballer that comes out discussing all the injuries I discussed today, as well as many, many others.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. You can find my work at Fangraphs and at Rotoballer at ATCNY. A couple people have been asking me about the ATC projections, the rest of season projections. So figured just give you an update. It takes a little bit of time for the DC rest of season model for me to really get enough credibility so that I can put the new rates on. So currently when you look at it on Fangraphs, if you're interested, they are the preseason ATC rates with adjusted playing time by Fangraphs every single nightly. Probably in about a week or so, I will be updating rates, and I'll be updating rates about every 3 to 4 weeks thereafter till probably until the end of August, Labor Day or so. So that is the adjustment. Just wait another week or so. I know people have been asking, hey, are you going to adjust rates? I'm like, yes, just that it's not as simple as just do it now. But anyways, that's the story with me. And, of course, you can listen to the Beat the Shift podcast every week. We have a lot of fun, great guests, and thanks so much for tuning in. All right, once again, thank you so much to Larry Schechter for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.